Meloman, stand up and realize. Meloman, say that you won't give up. Unwrap your distress, throw it on the ground. Cheer up and smile inside. Meloman, on you go with your life. Take a chance right now and see what's out there. Meloman, don't wait too long. Dream, dream, dream. Meloman, dream, dream, dream. Dream, dream, dream. Meloman, dream, dream, dream. Dream, dream, dream. Meloman.
Talk about the radio.
On this afternoon's Talk About the Radio, we have Dr. John Armwood in our studio to talk about a rather compelling issue of whether Korea is two or one nation. Hello, John.
Hello, Mayeon. Dr. Park, how are you doing this Sunday?
Pretty good. And how about yourself?
I'm feeling wonderful.
Yes, we have this controversial topic along with the beautiful weather.
What a combination.
Okay, so recently I was talking to my students, and I've realized that they have slightly different opinion about Korea being one or two countries. So, and personally, in my generation, we consider Korea being two separate nations.
My students have the same reaction, and I sense a lot of fear, particularly from the younger students, that if Korea were to reunify, that they would be carrying a tremendous financial burden. So I think that plays a part in their attitude towards seeing Korea as two nations. Plus, they don't remember it. I mean, I know I was born during the last days of the Korean Civil War, but to young people in their 20s and early 30s, that was a long time ago.
And when you mentioned financial burden, what do you mean by that?
Well, many people fear what will happen in Korea will be similar to what Germany went through. Prior to 1990, there were two Germanys. There was the Federal Republic of Germany, which was called West Germany, and there was the German Democratic Republic that was called East Germany. And you had a situation where the economy of the Federal Republic of the West was 3 times the per capita income of the economy of the East. So when the two Germanys joined together and became one nation, the West had to invest a lot of money in the infrastructure, in the building, into the economy of the East German. So the whole German economy went into a slump for a number of years. It has bounced back, but it took some time. And Yemen, when northern and southern Yemen joined together, there was also this split between the former communist north and the west-leaning south. And again, the south had to absorb a lot of the economic problems that came with the joining of the south and north together.
Good. Yeah. So now that I realized that we do have this big burden of finance for a while. Yeah, I guess if the two Koreas are united, of course. However, in terms of, like, for example, last Wednesday when there was this North and South Korean soccer teams World Cup preliminary games. I mean, we were two nations definitely fighting against each other. Of course, South Korea won, luckily, but What do you think about these sporting events?
I think they're good because sport gives people an outlet for their frustrations, but it also brings us together. You can see the people and the athletes as real human beings. And that's something which I think is very, very useful. I remember going back to 1973 when an American ping pong team went to Beijing, China, and it opened the door to further talks between the leaders of China, Mao Zedong, and President of the United States, Nixon, which led to eventual recognition of the People's Republic of China by the United States in 1979. So a lot of times sporting events open the door for further close contacts between countries. And it was interesting, this past Thursday's edition of the Korea Times, I read an article talking about the whole idea of the financial burden that South Korea would be carrying. Then the author claimed of this article that it was somewhat of a myth, that it might not be as bad as many people are saying that it would be. But I think that's open to outlooks on both sides. Both people see it that way and people who are minimizing the possible economic consequences.
Yeah, it was interesting to note that the German Prime Minister Merkel once said, "Go alone if you want to go faster. However, go together if you want to go further."
And that sounds quite interesting. In my mind, what I keep on envisioning is a train going from Busan all the way into China and carrying goods and services and products. Instead of having to go by sea from Busan or Ulsan, they go by railroad all the way through the Koreas into China. And that would be an economic boon to, I think, all of Korea.
Yeah, definitely. I would like to go by train to Pyongyang or to all the way to Hamhung myself one day. Yeah.
And just think of auto parts, machine parts, computer chips riding that train.
Yeah, it's wonderful to ride a train all the way to the North Korea. However, it makes me feel sad about the recent report of the food shortage crisis in North Korea. And in the report it said since 2007, almost 1/3 of North Koreans are suffering from food crisis, and therefore they sometimes starve to death. And I guess in cases like this, we really need to give all our support to help with the North Korean people. But our aid should be, to some extent, mutually beneficial in spirit. And what is your reaction to this?
I think that it's a very complex issue, primarily because it's so difficult to get food aid directly to the people of North Korea, the people of the People's Republic of Korea. The problem is that the aid often goes to the military.
True.
Even if it's direct food aid, it gets diverted to the military, and the poor working people, the poor peasants, don't get the food aid that they need. And that's such a terrible thing. But at the same time, our hearts and pockets have to go out to those people to help them.
Yeah. It makes me really sad, really, to imagine that kind of picture, happening in North Korea. But really, I guess there has to be some kind of filtering process as to really what you said, like, the food has to go directly to the people. Right. And what about other humanitarian aids?
Well, I really think that from a geopolitical situation, you really have to work with both South Korea and China in pressuring North Korea to allow real humanitarian aid to get to the people. I mean, China has such a strong influence on North Korea,
right?
And there has to be a convergence of interest there. The Chinese government, of course, is concerned about North Korea collapsing because there would be a huge refugee problem facing China, as people from the North Korean border fled into China. So there is some convergence of interest between South Korea and China on this issue, but China has kind of been a reluctant player in this, and they haven't put the pressure very often on China. They did it a couple of years ago when they turned off the spigot to the oil.
Right.
But we really would hope that they would put more pressures. They could work with the government here in Seoul to allow aid to get to the people who really need it the most.
Now that I hear the word pressure, I feel kind of pressure too. Can we take a short break now?
Alrighty, we're going to listen to some music that in a way ties directly into what we've been talking about. We're going to hear organist Joey DeFrancesco performing All or Nothing at All. Half a loaf isn't good enough.
All or nothing at all. Half of love never appealed to me. If your love never could yield to me, then I'd rather have nothing at all. Oh, no, nothing at all. If it's love, there is no in between. Why begin, then cry for something that might have been? No, I'd rather have nothing at all. Don't bring your lips so close to my cheek. Don't smile or I'll be lost beyond recall. The touch of your hand, the look in your eyes makes me weak, and my heart might grow dizzy and fall. And if I fell under the spell of your call, I would be caught in the undertow. So you see, I've got to say no, no, all or nothing at all.
DiFrancesco at the Hammond B3 organ.
Two nations or one. That is the issue that we've been talking about so far. And like earlier, we talked about the German case and also the Yemenis as well. And it makes me, it makes me sad again to tell to the world that Korea is the only separated country in the world. And in order to be at least to prepare ourselves to the road to the unification, what would be the kind of things that we as, common, ordinary people can do?
I think make sure that our economic situations or situation is as stable as possible, that the rate of national savings is high, because we're going to have to invest at some point some money in this unification if it is to occur.
Right.
So preparing people both financially and young people psychologically for it, because many young people don't want it because they don't want to give up anything.
Right.
It's funny one of the benefits of the younger generation growing up in such a prosperous Korea is they haven't had to suffer through what their parents and grandparents went through before the prosperity of the 70s and 80s really changed the face of Korea. Young people have to understand that this came with a price of blood, sweat, and tears that their grandparents and great-grandparents went through. The old ladies that they pass on the street all the time, cleaning up the stairs and selling vegetables, they went through it. But young folks don't know, and I think it would be a nice national project if the stories of these elderly people who are in their 70s and 80s now were put down so young people could hear them on recording in the libraries. We have a project in the United States which is called StoryCorps.
StoryCorps?
Yeah, by National Public Radio, where the stories of people of previous generations are recorded. Various parts of the country, you can go in and record your story. And it forms a database that people can come in and listen and learn from. I think that might be a good idea.
Yeah, sounds excellent. And so, in other words, no pain, no gain.
Exactly.
And the ideological problems may persist for some time, though, because the way the propaganda works in the North, for people to really open their minds to what is happening in the world, in the real world. In South Korea, for example, because they might have been shut down from the rest of the world, and it may take some time for them to really face the world.
Well, we saw that with the opening of East Germany once the wall was torn down, and I remember crying watching on television as the wall came down after the Brandenburg Gate was opened, because as a child I watched that wall being built, and then the people had to deal with the shock of dealing with a prosperous and different culture. And of course people from the North, once they encounter the culture of the South, are also in a state of shock. We know the people who have escaped from North Korea and come into Korea have had to go through a period of transition. And can you imagine if this was a large amount of people going through this process, it would be very, very difficult. But people are resilient, people can survive, and it may take a generation for the transition to occur. But once it does, Korea will be stronger and more powerful as a result.
I think so. I mean, with more people, and we as one nation can be stronger and more competitive in the world.
One of the biggest problems that Korea has now, and I was looking at a story in Thursday's Korea Times talking about, I mentioned that paper again, but talking about the amount of exports that Korea has. 55% of the economy is dominated by exports. If the country was one country, there'd be a greater domestic market. And would make the whole of Korea less vulnerable to the global ebbs and tides of world trade.
And of course, people, younger people right now who are not employed may find job opportunities in the North also. Jabal groups build more companies in North Korea.
More jobs for everyone. Yeah. Growth is geometric, so it benefits everybody. The more growth there is, the more jobs, the more wealth goes around, which generates even more jobs and wealth.
Okay. How realistic will this unification be done? Do you think this will be done in the near future, or whether this will be more in the long-term kind of project?
I do not claim to be an expert on Korean history, but from the little that I know, that the governments in Korea have not changed very quickly, even during stressful times. So my suspicion is that it will take longer than we expect. I mean, the government has been in place now since, 1945? So that's been, 60 years.
Right.
So we're looking at maybe a good many more years before I think change comes. But the cultures have a similarity, even though they are growing apart, there's still a similarity. There's a sense in the South, the more powerful nation, that there is one country, even among those who are afraid of unification. So that I think eventually it'll probably happen, but it may not be within my lifetime or the lifetime of my children.
Just like to Germany's case, we share the same language and we also have people who have their relatives, their families back in North. So perhaps this familial ties would get us perhaps faster to overcome these difficulties, the separation issues. Yeah.
Well, that's the one thing that, because the generation that knows relatives in the North is quickly passing on. I mean, it's been a long time. Those people are in their 80s. They knew people when they were in their teens. But that generation is passing, so it's unlikely that they will see that day. I mean, but
probably
hopefully in the future, we all will see that day.
Yeah, I guess the thing is, as long as we work harder to accomplish that goal, or perhaps that perspective, I think it'll come perhaps quicker than we might realize before long.
I hope you're right, Dr. Park. I hope you're right.
Okay, so that pretty much wraps up what we have been talking about, Korea being two nation or one nation. And apparently it doesn't really seem like it's one nation yet. So once again, thank you very much for coming to our show this afternoon, and hope to see you again next week.
Thank you, Dr. Park. Mayeon, it's been a pleasure.
Artists are drawn to leading cities of the world. The artist Renaud only installs his works in world-class cities. He chose Busan. Busan's dynamic power is the origin of life. More than you think. Dynamic Busan.
All right, we've covered all our listeners' feedback on our programs aired on Busan FM during the past week. As today has been aptly termed as the media era, the listeners have a stronger voice, unlike the situation in the past. The Busan FM will try and work harder to find out ways to ensure the right of our listeners' choices by being different and unique from other English radio stations in Korea and accommodating what our listeners want from us. Well, listeners, please remember that we are always open to receive your candid opinions and comments about our programs on the Weekly Review. For those who want to send handwritten messages, please send your messages to the Weekly Review, 5th floor, KNN Building, 15, 정보타운, 5 row, 연제구, Busan, Korea. The postal code is 611711. That has been all for our first weekly review of April. I hope all of you have enjoyed today's show. The weekly review has been produced by producer Johanna, writer Yuri, and myself, Park Mayeon. Thank you for listening.
You know, I will give you everything.
Our last song for today is I'll Give You Everything by Classic Y.
I see, I will give you everything. This moment we're together is like a dream come true. Will you give your life? I want to have it all. If you listen what I say, the memory will take us to there. I've been ever missing you so sadly. We'll never be apart. Now I know that I'm into your soul. I will give you everything. Close your eyes and think of me now. It will show how much I care. I see, I will give you everything. Although we are not together, I will keep your heart and dream.
You know, I will give you everything. I believe my love to you now is greater than before. I see, I will give you everything. I'll be there to comfort you. Dynamic, Busan EFM.
Now you are listening to Busan EFM 90.5. The time is now 4 o'clock.